So good morning, everybody. We are here for what is now part 3. Can y'all hear me okay? No? Okay. All right. Ooh, okay, that's loud. Is that good? Okay, so good morning. Again, my name is Maggie. We are here for part 3 of a series called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. So the title of the series comes from Psalm 139. And just to kind of recap, 2 weeks ago, we talked about Gideon and how God called him despite him feeling not ready and not equipped, but yet he came through. And then last week, thanks Father Nate for filling in, we talked about how recognizing our own weaknesses, like Gideon did, can actually be a source of strength. And we reflected on the quote from St. Isaac the Syrian that was, "Blessed is the man who knows his own weakness, because this knowledge becomes to him the foundation, root, and beginning of all goodness." Okay, so today we're going to keep this theme going around recognizing how we are fearfully and wonderfully made by looking at one more Bible character. And that character is Esther. And so just a little sidebar. So when I think of Esther, this is what I think of, because for so many years when my kids were young, we had all these VeggieTales going. Hopefully some of the other parents can agree with this. And for me, for a long time, I heard all these stories but never actually saw them because they were in the back of my car. But anyway, so I want to tell you about Esther, and I'm actually going to use the little VeggieTales characters just because I think they're kind of cute. So we're going to talk about Esther and then kind of tie that back to Gideon and what we can learn from both of them around how we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So who are the characters in the book of Esther? So just kind of a backdrop. So Esther is a book in the Bible in the Old Testament. It's after the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it is set about 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. And some of the Jews returned back to Jerusalem, but some of them did not, okay? And so the book of Esther is about a community of Jews who were living in a city called Susa, which is in what was the ancient Persian Empire, so modern-day Iraq. All right, so who are the characters that we have? So we have King Xerxes. Again, this is his VeggieTales character. And we'll find out as I share the story, he's kind of an interesting character. We have Mordecai. So Mordecai's a Jew. He happened to be elevated to be serving in the king's palace. And then he ended up kind of adopting his niece, Esther, who was orphaned. So she came to live with them in the city. And then, of course, no good VeggieTales story is good without a villain, and we have a villain named Haman, and he really was in the book. Okay, so these are kind of the 4 main characters that we have as we go through the story. So the story begins with the king throwing this very elaborate feast, and it lasted 187 days, and it was all about this very grandiose display of his power and his wealth and all of that. And on the very last day, he demanded that his existing queen come and show off her beauty in front of everybody, and she declined. And so he ousted her. And he's like, "Out with you, I'm going to find a new queen." And so they go around and they try to find all the other women, the young women, so they can select a new queen. And somehow Esther kind of gets picked up in the middle of all of this, okay? And I'm kind of going high level with the story. So she gets picked up, and she's like, "What's happening here?" And so somehow she's selected, okay? But she hid that she was a Jew. And again, she wins this pageant, and the king is so enamored with her that he makes her queen. So now all of a sudden she's thrown into the palace, she's queen. And really interesting twist of events here. So Mordecai, her uncle, who is also serving in the palace, overhears about a plot to kill the king. And he's not quite sure how to tell the king. So he tells Esther, and she tells the king, and Mordecai gets credit for this, and so now they're both kind of elevated and kind of in good favor with the king, which is a good thing. So then the next part after that, so after she's selected queen, we get introduced to Haman, who is, again, the villain in this story. Haman is kind of like the right-hand person to the king, and he somehow convinces the king to sign a decree to kill all of the Jewish people in their city, in their district. And they actually they wrote this decree out, and they picked a date to do it. And Mordecai was aware of what was happening, but obviously couldn't do anything to stop it. And so somehow the king, again, is convinced to do this. And so this is kind of Haman's plot, because he doesn't like Mordecai, and he wants to just eradicate this group from their city. So then what happens is Mordecai now goes to Esther, as she's really the only hope to save them, because the king finds favor in her. She's now the queen. But she has to do a couple of things to save the people. She has to kind of reveal that she's of Jewish descent or Jewish background, and she's got to go approach the king. And so back then, it was kind of not appropriate to go approach the king without having permission to do so. So she's really got this major decision point here, okay? Her people are at risk, they're in danger, and she needs to kind of muster up the courage to do something. But remember, she was just kind of thrown into this role. So if we think about ourselves, how many times do we find ourselves in decisions like this, or maybe we're thrown into something, and there's the easy way out, which may not be the right thing to do, and there's a hard way out, which requires a bit of courage from us. And so even though we look at the story of Esther, there's a lot, and I'm going to, as we kind of go through the rest of it, there's a lot that we can really pull out for ourselves, okay? She was chosen, but she didn't feel equipped to do anything. She even tells Mordecai at one point, she's like, I didn't even ask for this. I didn't ask to be put in this position. So how many times are we not asked to be into something, but yet we're thrown into it, and there's some kind of responsibility put on us to do something, okay? So for her, it was much easier to stay silent, stay below the radar, stay kind of under the water level. But she knew if she didn't do that, there would be really bad consequences for herself, for her uncle, and for all her people, okay? So what happens next? So Mordecai tells her, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. So he's telling her, you know what, if you don't do something, something else is going to happen somewhere. But you and your father's house will perish. So short term, there's going to be a negative consequence. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And this is a really, really pivotal moment for her and for us to reflect on. Was this the moment that she was put into this position for? How many times do we face these moments and maybe think, not now. I don't have the courage for this. I don't have the whatever for this, okay? So when we think about where you have come for such a time as this, so she had a really kind of big pressure on her to decide what to do. So he's challenging her, pushing her, asking her, and really nudging her strongly that this is why she was put into this role, okay? So here's how she responds. She says, go gather all the Jews and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. So she knew that going to the king was against the law and that something, may not go well. And she says, and if I perish, I perish. So she was willing to take that risk to save her people. Again, think about ourselves. We may not be in situations as serious as this. It could even be really, really small things that we may not take one small step to help somebody else, okay? There's actually a lot going on into this piece that I want to unpack. If we think about Gideon, God was the one that told him, mighty man of valor, and really encouraged him, okay? What's interesting about the book of Esther, God's not really mentioned specifically, but he's working. You can see his work, but he's not specifically called out in that way. Mordecai is the one that pushes her. Have you had somebody in your life kind of push you, nudge you, or have you been the nudge that somebody else needed? Okay? So she decides to go ahead and go forth, and again, she says, and if I perish, I perish. And so she decides she's going to approach the king, but she's got to figure out exactly how to do this. So she goes to approach the king, and what she first does is she basically, because the king likes to party, so she basically proposes that they're going to have another party, okay? And so they do that. And in one, there's actually two parties that she throws. Haman is quite indulgent at the party, and he comes up with a plan to kill Mordecai because he's just really doesn't like him. And in an interesting turn of events that same night, the king couldn't sleep, so he asked that these royal chronicles be read to him. So these are all the things that are happening in the kingdom. And so somebody comes to read to him, and he reads to him about how Mordecai had previously saved his life. So now all of a sudden he does a complete about-face, okay? And now he orders Haman, the villain, to honor Mordecai publicly, okay? So there's a really interesting kind of turn of events that happens here. And it was in the party that they were having that Esther goes to talk to the king and tells him about this plan, and so he decides to figure out how to reverse the decree. There's a little bit of legality about how they reverse the decree and all of that, but she musters up the courage to do this and to tell him, hey, I'm a Jewish person, these are my people, and here's the plan that was put forth. And so they figure out how to reverse the decree. I won't go into all the details of that, okay? But my point in all of that is she really mustered up the courage to be able to go to the king despite what might happen to her, okay? So now, as we think about pulling these two stories together of Gideon and Esther, I wanted to kind of draw some parallels between the two. So both Gideon and Esther were kind of in the background, okay? Remember, Gideon said, I'm the smallest of my tribe is the smallest. Esther was really trying to blend in where she was, but they both stepped up when it was time, and they both had an impact when they stepped up. God saw the full picture before they did. And again, with Gideon, he was described as mighty man of valor. And in Esther's case, Mordecai was the one that told her, you were put here for such a time as this. And that's what kind of gave her that prick, that nudge to take action. They both needed affirmation, okay? And I want to kind of pause on this point for a moment because I think as humans, we always need some kind of affirmation. And I'm going to just give a little sidebar here. So I used the little VeggieTales characters because I thought it was cute. As I was finishing up the slides yesterday, one of my children walks in and sees the VeggieTales on my slides, and he's like, Mom, are you really going to do that? I'm like, yes, because I think it's fine. And literally, I was just asking Father Nate, I'm like, is that okay that I use VeggieTales? So we all kind of need affirmation, whether it's small things or little things. We're looking for that affirmation. And so where I want to flip it around to you is, where do you provide that affirmation for other people? People in your life need that. Where are you doing that for somebody else? And where can you be that nudge for somebody else? Both Esther and Gideon took faithful, courageous action despite their fear, despite their insecurity, and despite the negative consequences that might occur. But they still did it. And when they stepped into their calling, others were blessed. They were able to impact many, many, many other people. And I think sometimes we fall into that fear of ourselves of, well, I don't want to do that because we think about ourselves, and we may not think about everybody else that might be impacted. Okay? So God doesn't need us to be fearless. He just needs us to have faith. And whether you feel too small like Gideon or too silent like Esther, God sees more than you do. And he doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. So once he chooses, then he helps to qualify. And so it's up to us to kind of open that up and allow God to work through us to do that work, okay? So we're going to do like what we did in the last couple of weeks and have some discussion questions for you guys to get to know each other a little bit better and to continue the story. So here are our questions for today. Where are you playing small or staying quiet like Esther? Or the flip of it is, where is there an opportunity to not play small? When have you sensed for such a time as this moment? Have you had one of those moments? Have you sensed that maybe for somebody else and nudged them? And then what would it look like to take maybe one bold step this week? Maybe that's providing an affirmation to somebody else. Maybe that's stepping out about something that you feel strongly about, okay? So we're going to stop at this point, and again, just like what we've done the last couple of groups, just put yourselves in groups of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people, and use these questions to guide some discussion. Okay?